Welcome back. My name is Stephen Sanet. I'm an osteopathic medical physician from the United States. Today's going to be a short lecture on the components of lymph, the formation, the mechanisms affecting the formation and flow of lymphatic fluid. Composition. Lymphatic fluid is made up of proteins, fats, particulate matter, and interstitial fluids. From the proteins, 2/3 of that is coming from the liver and in the intestines. 1/3 comes from the intestinal fluids. The fats are coming from digestion of fatty foods from the intestines, and it's highest following a fatty meal. As much as 1 to 2% of the lymph content will be at the level of the thoracic duct. Particulate matter are other things, other impurities that are in your system from infections, injuries, normal and abnormal cell breakdown. The interstitial fluids, these are gathering from capillary leakage. I'm going to take you back to high school chemistry to explain how lymphatic fluid is formed and how it works. So just to explain the ideas of diffusion and osmosis. Diffusion is we take a glass of water, we put some ink in it, and the actual ink molecules will vibrate at a certain level. And they will vibrate until they equally distribute according to increased entropy. They will distribute evenly throughout the beaker. This is called entropy or chaos theory. The idea of osmosis in the bottom diagram here, what we have is a semi-permeable membrane, meaning that this membrane will separate these particles and will not allow these large particles to pass through. And it creates a pressure known as osmotic pressure. So if we have more solute particles, on this side than this side, since the water cannot, the particles cannot travel through the membrane, the best way for them to try and give an equal amount of water space to each molecule is to force a pressure known as osmotic pressure through this membrane. So it forces this unequal measure. These are the small forces that are at work in our lymphatic system. So particulate matter, which would be these red dots here, this will determine normal functioning versus abnormal functioning of capillary leakage according to Starling's law. Medically speaking, we use a colloquial or non-medical term. When fluid is leaking into that interstitial space, we will say that someone is third spacing. It means that it's an abnormal situation where water is leaving the normal systems and going into that interstitial space. Capillary exchange, there's a bunch of factors that will affect our normal osmotic pressure according to Starling's equilibrium. So let's just look at the capillary side. Okay, there's a very small amount of pressure in millimeters of mercury. By the time we get out of the artery, the main arteries, then we get to the arterioles, both pulsatile, then it starts to just ebb into the capillary bed. There's conjecture as to whether or not that is pulsatile. I will leave that argument off for the purposes of this lecture. So let's just say that there's a very mild pressure coming from the capillary, 17.3 millimeters of mercury. That's what's pushing it out. In addition to that, in the area where it's going, there's a negative interstitial pressure drawing it out of the capillary, as well as an interstitial osmotic pressure from solutes at the other end that are drawing it out. So that gives us a total outward force of 28.3 milligrams of mercury, which is drawing fluid out of the capillary bed. What's trying to keep fluid in the capillaries is the inward plasma osmotic force in the blood itself, and that has a pressure of 28.0 millimeters of mercury. So you can see that when we do the math for this, the net outward force is this very, very small leakage, if you will, of 0.03 millimeters of mercury. I think leakage myself is a bad term because it implies something that's broken or something that's not operating properly. It's leaking. In this case, this is what it is designed to do, that very gentle pressure out of the capillaries. Now, things that are going to affect our osmotic pressure are going to be things that increase the amount of particulate matter that is breaking down, that can be found in the vascular system or the lymphatic system. So physical activity will affect it. Lack of activity will affect it. Your nutritional status will affect it. Nutritional status, this is more of a, more in the third world kind of thing. And what I mean by third world is, I mean people that are not getting proper nutrition or not eating 3 meals a day, people that are very impoverished. This is what I mean by nutritional status. We don't see this too much. Well, what we see is sedentary lifestyle, and we see people that are grossly overweight in the United States, North America. Liver and renal disease. If you have these diseases and you're having abnormal breakdown of the liver and renal parenchyma, that's going to add to your osmotic pressure. Hypertension, cardiovascular disease. Obesity. Obesity is a plague of the wealthy world. We can say to a lesser degree, postural imbalances and strains and somatic dysfunctions will contribute to it. But really, I would link these ideas with this idea. So if your postural imbalances or strains are preventing you from being active, then that might be a contribution. But the major contributions to this capillary exchange changing are going to be other underlying comorbidities, cardiovascular problems, hepatic problems, renal problems, and so forth. Water content in the body. This diagram to the left is showing you the relative water content in different parts of your body. And as you can see, we can't live without water. It is just a major component of every different facet of our body. For that reason, adequate hydration is an important aspect for health, to keep things running smoothly and to clean out things as needed. Your fluid components. In the average 70 kg man, you have about 40 liters of fluid. 2/3 of that is intracellular. 1/3 of that is extracellular. Of that 40 liters, only 3 liters is extracellular. Of that extracellular fluid is plasma. The rest is non-plasma. It's all flowing through the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is moving that fluid by diaphragmatic and muscular activity. For that reason, the diaphragm particularly is very important, because that is your 24 hours a day, 7 days a week lymphatic pump. Muscular activity for people that are very sedentary or deconditioned, that are not able to do much exercise, I really recommend breathing exercises for them. Things that they might accomplish in Tai Chi, yoga, or things like this, because that is where most of your lymphatic fluid is pumping all the time. And as you can see here, most of this is intracellular fluid. The rest of this is interstitial, plasma, and other fluids here. The link to our cardiovascular system, and that's an important link. The cardiovascular system, while it only has a small amount of fluid, that's pumping because of the heart. The lymphatic fluid is pumping because the diaphragm's change in pressure is a direct and indirect effect on lymphatic fluid moving. And it's actually a simple equation. If we look at cardiac output is an equation. How many times the heart is beating by what is the stroke volume of the left ventricle. What is the volume of the left ventricle depends on two other factors, and that is 30% of the blood in the left ventricle gets there by atrial contraction, while most of it is getting there from the passive filling of the inferior vena cava. That passive filling is happening from negative increased intrathoracic pressure as you take a breath in. So As you breathe deeply, you are assisting blood coming back into the inferior vena cava. You are increasing the passive filling. Increase in passive filling will increase the ionotropy of the heart, the strength of the contraction. So the heart can only pump out what was in. So these two are linked, stroke volume. So the more we have of our venous return, the more we're going to have increased stroke volume. More increased stroke volume plus diaphragmatic action equals increased lymphatic flow. So the two are intimately tied to each other. Lastly, just a saying from A.T. Still. Dr. Still said, we strike at the source of life and death when we go into lymphatics. For my own part, as a physician, I think the lymphatics have been grossly overlooked and enough attention has not been paid to it. And another interesting caveat is lymphatics were not paid a lot of attention in the medical world until about the 1950s. They're around. Around that time, they suddenly realized that they could stage cancer by the effect, by whether or not cancer has gotten into the lymphatic system. In other words, stage 1, stage 2, there's a cancer, but it hasn't metastasized to the lymphatic system. Stage 3, 4, it's already gotten into the lymphatic system, and thereby it's able to travel around the body. And that's a very big demarcation for prognosis with cancer. And then suddenly the spotlight got turned in the lymphatic system. But A.T. Still was recognizing this and theorizing this long before that the lymphatic system was a very necessary and important system to sustain health. I thank you for your kind attention and look forward to more lectures coming.